Hey, Brad, welcome back to T-Town. I hope you're doing well.
Oh, good afternoon, Ryan. Good to be back with you.
Hey, we're just trying to rescue you because I know your basketball going on, and we just want to, everybody's talking basketball, and we want to talk football with you, man. So we want to rescue you.
Yeah,
That's
good because I have not been watching the basketball tournament.
Okay.
So I couldn't help you there anyway.
Okay.
Let's talk about something we both know a little bit more about.
Okay, let's do it. The report came out of the Tuscaloosa News from Alabama, Texas, Alabama, Notre Dame, Alabama, USC. As a college football fan, would those games grab you? I mean, does it still mean this as much as what it would meant maybe 20 years ago? Does those games grab your attention if we say we've got a matchup with Alabama, Notre Dame, Texas, or USC?
They do grab your attention, but I think it really matters most how good those teams are in the year that the game is actually played. Some of these sound great when they're first scheduled. Remember Alabama, Michigan a few years ago. I mean, on paper, it seemed like a great game, but when the game actually arrived, Alabama was all you had to do is watch the teams warming up before the game, and you could see that they were not equal, and obviously the game played out that way. And Alabama was a huge favorite going in, and so for people to get really excited about the game, it has to be more like Alabama FSU last year, which look, it might not have the same ring to it in terms of the overall history and tradition of college football. Not that Florida State is a nobody by any stretch, but it's not Notre Dame, it's not Texas or USC, but there was a big sense that Alabama-Florida State was a true showdown with national championship implications, and it was not going to be a major upset if the underdog won. And that's what you don't get that a lot, really, with Alabama games too much in the last several years. And so that's really the key. If they do play any of those teams, how good is the opponent? Is Alabama still as good at the time that the game is played? That all of that will impact how interested people are, because as much as we try to build up games, fans know. Fans know, and if the Vegas point spread says 14 or 17 or even more, you can only get the fans so excited for that.
Brad, when you look at neutral site games, you think they're wearing out? You think they're coming to an end, or you think we're going to see more of those in the future?
Well, I think they're going to level off. It's hard to say we'll see more because there's so many of them already. I just don't know how many more places they could actually go and play these games. And there are only a certain number of teams that people are really going to get excited about. You need to have at least one of those teams in the game for it to have real traction. There's some good matchups, and it's fun to watch these. We were just looking at some of them coming up the first weekend this season with Auburn and Washington and LSU and Miami. Those are good games that could potentially have an impact on the playoff. Once we won't know until November rolls around whether it did or not. But certainly at the time those games are played, those are between teams that you could see either one of them possibly being a contender, and so those games are fun. And I think for games that feel that way, neutral site is great. If it's two teams that you're like, you know what, I really can't see either of these teams being a factor later in the year, I would much rather be on someone's home field. And so I do think to some extent we have too many neutral site games. I'd rather see more home and homes. But if it's two good teams playing each other, I don't care where it is. I just want to see it. Look, in an ideal world, you'd love to see the big name programs playing each other in their stadium. So you could see an Alabama trot on the field in South Bend. You could see, USC, as actually I think we're going to see this fall, USC taking the field in Austin, Texas. Those are great for college football, but given what the sport has become and the emphasis on the playoff and all that, and the importance of schedule strength and all this, I just want to see the game played. I would hate to think that a game like that would end up not being played because someone was set on it being a home and home and wasn't willing to do it neutral site. As a fan, the venue is not nearly as important to me as the matchup.
Well, I'm having a hard time here in Tuscaloosa, 159 days away from Alabama, Louisville, to encourage Alabama fans to drive. Let's just say that they're from Tuscaloosa, 10 hours to Orlando to watch Alabama, Louisville. Can you give me a reason why this game maybe grabs you a little bit? Alabama, Louisville coming up in Orlando in 159 days.
It's a tough sell.
It will.
I mean, certainly Alabama has some questions. There'll be a whole lot of talk all spring and summer about the defense, and especially the secondary, which is almost a total rebuild there. But, it would be very different if Lamar Jackson was back. And you knew exactly what Louisville had on the offensive side. That said, they still have Bobby Petrino, and you can think whatever you want about Bobby Petrino, in terms of the off-the-field stuff that's always been associated with his name. But the guy can coach offense. And I'd be really surprised if Alabama goes out there with, so many new faces on defense and just absolutely shuts down a Bobby Petrino offense. Now, would I be shocked if Louisville only has 7 at halftime and then ends up with 21? No, I mean, I can see it being that type of scenario, because you're still talking about an inexperienced quarterback taking on an Alabama defense. And I think that's what's going to make it hard for people nationally to really buy into the idea that, that Louisville has a good chance here. Now, maybe they have, a really good quarterback waiting in the wings, and we don't know anything about him. That's one of those things that they'll find. We'll all find out when they get on the field. But anything shy of another Lamar Jackson quality QB, and it's really hard to believe that Louisville will be able to keep up, because they didn't have a great defense last year. And so it is hard to see Louisville holding Alabama's offense down, regardless of what happens with the quarterback situation for Bama.
Brad, do you see anybody maybe being this year's Georgia, maybe a veteran-loaded team that we're not talking about as much as we should be, that we will be talking about November of December, that could be a part of college football playoffs?
You know what? It's such a tough one to answer, because Georgia had great talent. It's not just that they had a bunch of seniors. You look at the way that they had recruited, and certainly Mark Richt was not recruiting at the level that Kirby has recruited at the last couple of years, but Rick's recruiting classes were good. He was usually in the top 10. So they had a lot of really talented guys, because the first team that comes to mind when you talk about, having a lot of experience would be Michigan State. But Michigan State in a typical year has maybe a total of like 5 4-stars on the whole roster. No 5-stars. I mean, that's the typical Michigan State team, a bunch of guys who were kind of overlooked in the recruiting process. And every now and then some of them do develop into first-round draft talents. But it's hard to compare a team like Michigan State to Georgia just because of the level of talent and athleticism. But Michigan State is a team that will have a lot of experience. They were pretty good last year. They absolutely got blown out by Ohio State and Columbus, and that's what makes it difficult to say, all right, they're going to be that much better. But they do have a relatively advantageous schedule in that they don't play Wisconsin from the other side, and Michigan and Ohio State both go to East Lansing, so they get both those teams at home. They do have to make the trip to Penn State, but I guess in terms of a team with a lot of experience that might be able to make that next step into the upper echelon nationally because of it, the first one that comes to mind is Michigan State, but they're not at Georgia's level in terms of overall talent.
In the SEC East, do you see some potential hurdles for Georgia in this upcoming year? I mean, can Tennessee, can Muschamp at South Carolina, can Dan Mullen in Gainesville, can they throw up some, maybe not roadblocks, but at least hurdles for the Georgia team on the SEC East of making it back to Atlanta?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, look, there's this kind of assumption, I think, nationally. I don't know how much of an assumption there is, locally, but nationally, I think a lot of people look at where Kirby has that program and they see the similarities in the trajectory between where he is at this stage and where Saban was with Alabama at the same stage, and they're like, okay, Kirby's building another Alabama, and there are a lot of things you can look at and say that could be the case, but I mean that's asking a lot.
Sure.
That's asking a lot to do what Saban has done at Alabama. Even if you could replicate it for the first 5 years, that's still asking a lot. And I think because of that, there are people out there who are just assuming that Georgia will reload, all the top players they lost. There will be someone, if not as good, almost as good, taking their places, that there'll be, minimal drop off. You assume that the quarterback position is going to be better. At the very least would be equal to what it was a year ago. And especially when you look at the way that Fromm, kind of improved in the way he played in big games down the stretch, you would expect him to be better. But that's not a given. And of course, there's the complacency that can set in. Now, when a team loses a national championship game the way they lost it, typically they come out hungry. But this is also a team that won the SEC after having not won the SEC for a really long time. So I think there's both sides. There's a hunger from coming up short in the fashion that they did and how much that hurts. But there's also a lot of patting on the back going on in Athens because they feel like that they're on a roll. And that's something that, look, we've heard Saban talk about it every year when they've come off of a championship, is complacency. And I just think because Georgia, an SEC championship is a big deal for Georgia. And so I think that there is the potential for there to be some level of complacency there. And I don't know that you can just assume because Kirby Smart had so much time working with Nick Saban that these things that have not affected Alabama over the years are not going to affect Georgia. They might not, but they could. And so until I see Kirby do it a couple more years, I'm not going to assume that Georgia is immune to the same pitfalls that seem to get everybody in the country other than Alabama, even teams that have really good talent.
I'm not asking you to debate because I know that you probably helped compile a lot of this data, but I saw ESPN.com with Adam Rittenberg putting up a big article with the future, looking at the 2018, 2019, and 20 seasons. I'm sure a lot of this is based on recruiting, but they've got Georgia number 1, Clemson 2, Oklahoma 3, and then Alabama number 4. We talk about future rankings in college football.
I have not seen the article. I've seen it in past years.
Sure.
There was a span of time where I did participate in that. I'm not sure who he spoke to. I think if you're looking at, down the road, one thing that is at least going to start coming into consideration for Alabama is whether Saban is going to be there 3 years from now. Now, I think it's easy to look at it right now and say he probably will be, but every year we get into the future and you keep looking 3 years down the road, it seems to be more likely that either he's not going to be there or that at some point there's going to be a drop-off. I mean, surely he can't continue to do the things that he's doing now once he's 70, for example. I mean, I say that just based on every other coach in history. And by the way, if I remember correctly, the only coach who has ever won a national championship at an age older than what Saban will turn during the upcoming season is Bobby Bowden when he won his last one in 1999. And during that, Bobby Bowden was, even though he still coached another 10 years after that, Bowden was already at a point there where he was very hands-off. And his assistants were doing most of the coaching. I remember the national championship game that season. He actually, waited and did the sideline interview after the kickoff to start the second half. I mean, can you imagine like a coach like just hanging out with the sideline reporter? And it's like, oh, you know what, we're about to play. It's not just the kickoff, but the first play from scrimmage of the second half. I'll hang out with you and talk. But that's where he was at that point. It's just he wasn't doing a lot of coaching, and that's very different from Saban. So I get what my point is that I think that part of part of this is just this belief that at some point Saban's either going to step away, retire, or he's going to at least take a small step back. It's just, he's already defied the odds by doing what he's done for as long as he has. And as he gets closer and closer to age 70, there's just going to be more of a belief that even if he keeps going, surely, he's got to cede some ground to the rest of the sport. And maybe that's what Adam's looking at there. I don't know. I haven't read it, but that's just my guess. I do think, though, that where everything sits at the moment, it does seem a little wishful thinking on the part of everyone else out there to think that Alabama wouldn't still be the cream of the crop 3 years from now. But we'll see. Look, you and I have talked about this before. So much of it's going to have to do with this next recruiting cycle, or the current recruiting cycle that's already started.
It right there.
If Alabama does not have a top 3 class again, then I think it's very fair for people to start making assumptions that something is changing. Now, look, if they have another class that's ranked around 5 or 6, they're still going to be really good. They're still going to be as talented as everybody else. They just won't be at a level above everybody else anymore, and that would make them more vulnerable than they have been. But until that happens, if they bounce back with another number 1 recruiting class, I would guess that when this list is done next year, you'll see Alabama back at number 1 because there'll be less and less evidence to suggest that things might be slipping.
And Brad, final thing, and I promise you I won't squeeze any more time out of you, but did you see on Thursday and Friday, it was that release of information, the Freedom of Information Act in Tennessee, when Jeremy Pruitt was hired? I don't know if you saw this, but I think your colleague, maybe Adam again, Rittenberg, that compiled all this data, and it was Alabama's Greg Byrne sharing coaching analytics with evaluating the best coaches. In other words, Greg Byrne has already begun prepping, saying we like coaching efficiency here, 1, 2, 3, 4. Who gets the most job done? Who gets the most out of their players? They're also thinking about it too inside that football building because they're coming up with analytics. They're dedicating somebody to evaluating future coaches and current coaches when that day does come. Because at 66, even though we're not anticipating a retirement, Father Time catches up with all of us, man. It does.
It does, and I think the other part of this is that none of us really know. I mean, say none of us. 99.9% of us don't know. I don't get the impression that Nick Saban is close, really, really close to that many people. So I'd say there are very few people in the world who know what it would take for him to decide to hang it up. And there is that possibility he could win one more national championship, which could come as soon as 9 months from now. And if that were to happen, and he then has more national titles than anyone else, and he's getting close to 70, is there a chance he might say, you know what, I don't have anything else to prove, and then just step away at the top of his game? I mean, that's one of the hardest things to do in sports, whether you're a player or a coach, is to step away at the top of your game. But I think it's at least a possibility. You have to consider if he were to win this year. Look, he's one of those guys, as long as he's motivated, he's going to keep going, and there's no telling how long he can go. But if he does have that point where he feels like there's nothing left for him to really prove to anyone, and he wants to take some time and pursue something else, he's not going to sit on the sofa. We know that. Sure. We know that. If he gets out of coaching, it's going to be to get into something else that he's going to take very seriously. But I don't think we can say for sure that it couldn't happen as soon as next off season. Look, maybe what it is he wants to give whatever his current situation is at quarterback, whether that's 2 more years of Hurts or 2 or 3 more of Tua. Maybe he wants to give it, let that run its course, and then he would step away. I think that's a believable scenario as well. It's also believable that he coaches 10 more years. I don't think it's likely, but I wouldn't be shocked to see him keep going. So you never know.